This subject, the Church of Santa Maria del Salute in Italy, in Venice, is a great subject for working on our proportions as we draw, to learn to observe more carefully and draw more accurately in proportion what our subject is. And it's a good subject because in many ways it's a series of boxes and cylinders that are cut and stacked on each other with a few roofs and other associated architectural features. And while this is a heavily decorated church, from this angle, where we're mostly looking at the rear, we actually don't see much of that detail. So it's not a complex, ornamented church or scene from this view. It is a highly ornamented church. But we get to focus on the shapes, and we get to focus on the proportions of the shape. And by proportions, I mean the relative width to height that we have in all of these boxes. So whether we draw the same size as our reference or whether we're drawing it larger or smaller, we need the proportions of all the individual shapes to be the same as in our reference. And that will make our drawing proportionately larger or smaller or the same size. So I start with this tower that's approximately in the center. I'm trying to draw this actual size. I finish up drawing it slightly larger, but hopefully it's still in proportion. I now match the tower on the other side, and when I draw in proportion, I find concentrating on alignment is very helpful, very important. I look at where things align, where they're at the same level, say, where they line up in the reference. And then if I've drawn part of that already, then in my drawing, I seek to line up what lines up in the reference. And if it doesn't, or if it won't easily, if it's going to look too large in the part I'm drawing now, then sometimes that tells me to go back to what I've already drawn, and if in some way I can just make it a little bit smaller or make its effect, its visual effect, a little bit smaller, then I can do that, and that can help bring it back into alignment with now the part that I'm going to draw. These domes, these small domes, I find in some ways very, very small domes, such as we have here, are actually harder to draw than a large dome. It's easy to overfill the dome like it's an overinflated balloon, I find. It is made a bit more difficult by my not being able to turn my paper to do the, for me, being right-handed, more difficult right-hand side of the curve of the dome. I wouldn't hesitate to do that though if I wasn't recording. And then we have these roofs that stretch horizontally and I think visually create a nice base for the church on top. I'm using a 0.2 millimeter fine liner, Copic Multiliner is the brand if you're interested. And I'm not wanting to put a lot of line work on this. I'm already thinking actually that it's looking a bit inky. Maybe I should have used a 0.1 millimeter pen because I do like this scene. It was taken on a very dull day in Venice, so there isn't any strong sunlight, so there isn't any strong shadows, and I've lightened it slightly as well just so that we can see it a little more clearly. And so I quite like that light pale effect, so I think I would have preferred a little less ink on the paper. And what I suggest is this is such a good exercise for proportion. I suggest that you just work at drawing a very simplified form if you want practice at proportions. Don't worry so much about the detail that you can see that you might want to suggest, but just work on drawing this almost as if it were a collection of kids' blocks of rectangles and cubes and domes to stack on top of each other. Really just focus on drawing this several times in its most simplified shape form, but really working to get the proportions correct. This is what I talk about when I talk about the need when we learn to draw to do exercises, to create our own drawing exercises rather than trying to draw artworks all the time. We're probably not ready to draw artworks, but exercises, slim down drawings, if you like, time-wise and line-wise, are faster, and it lets us concentrate on one aspect of drawing, one element of drawing. And proportions is such a problem area for so many of us when we draw that it's a great thing to concentrate on. So a drawing such as this, where it's easy to see the more simple shapes, is a great one just to draw as simple shapes, but seeking to get the shapes in proportion, so that overall, when we finish, our church looks like the church. The dome isn't too large, the towers aren't too small. Things align the way they're meant to align, and so forth. So possibly do that, or maybe ideally do this drawing as a proportion exercise 2 or 3 times, just working on the boxes, the proportions, the shapes, and then to sit down and have a go at doing this as a drawing, at putting whatever details you think are appropriate to add on the scale that you're drawing, and come up with a more finished drawing. But to see it as an exercise first, we have to realize that learning is a skill and it's a process. And simply by trying to do a finished drawing time after time after time after time is not the fastest way to learn, and it's certainly not the best way to learn. It's not the most effective way to learn. It's good when we draw to often have a focus of a particular skill that we're working on. And if we don't do the rest of the overhead that goes with drawing a scene properly, then we can concentrate on that one detail more easily, more quickly. And look, if you're finding this helpful, finding this interesting, then please remember to hit the like button. Leave me a comment and tell me your experience of proportions when you draw. Or if you've got a friend who draws, why not share this video with them? So now I've got these trees. This is a very quick sketch, so I am not putting too much time into these trees. Their real value, I think, is to provide a bit of value contrast, some darker areas of tone, and as a contrast to the architecture. So now we have just this small amount of the decoration around the main drum, these large discs that come out from the side perpendicular to the drum that serve as rather extraordinary bases for statues, I assume of the apostles, but I don't really know. And so I slow down just a little bit at this point, trying to see what's happening. You can see that my dome just goes slightly too high, and I've put my little man on top just slightly off center. Although it's probably not a man now that I think about it, since it is a church to Mary. And now I decide to add some value to this roof line, and I also add the same value with the same marks to that roof further down, as much to create some visual interest and contrast to the rising series of domes. In some ways, this church is a bit like Sacre-Cœur on Montmartre, where we have this cascading upwards, if you like, of domes that are stacked all around each other. And now just working out exactly how I'm going to finish the waterfront element, which I have already decided to simplify somewhat. So I never intended to put that part vessel in the lower right. This drawing took me 25 minutes to draw in real time. You could also use this as an exercise for a fairly brisk drawing, for practicing loose gestural marks. it's a good subject for that, particularly if you really simplify the line work down, but go beyond just working on proportions. And then I just need to add a few more details around it. The best way to use my videos is to watch them and listen to what I say and try and see me putting into practice what I describe as to my thought processes, because how we draw comes from how we think. And if we're not happy with our drawings, then there's something fundamental in the way we think that we need to change, that we need to develop. It's not usually our drawing technical skills that we need work on. It's more the way we think, the way we approach our drawing, what we look for, how much we do in our head before the first mark goes on the paper. And particularly if you try and draw along with me, then in the end, you're going to just be looking at my marks and copying them, my line work and copying that. And you're not going to have any sense of what thoughts produce that line work. And therefore, when you go to do your own drawing from a different reference, you're not going to know where to start, because the thought processes that told me where to start probably aren't going to be in your head at that point. So it's learning how to think, which is the most important thing when we draw. It predetermines every line. Now, of course, our skills, actual ink on paper skills, will need to improve, and they do improve, but they improve faster and in a much more encouraging way if our thinking gives them every chance to be successful. If we know more clearly what we're trying to do with our marks, it's easier to put them down. We shouldn't be experimenting as we draw so much. Exercises, though, are a great place to experiment with creating different effects and so forth with our lines and our marks. Again, another good reason to do exercises, because we really can be quite bold and adventurous in doing them. Getting pretty close here. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting. It's a great subject to have a go. It's one of the most geometric things I think I've ever drawn in a video. So why not have a go? And of course, you'll find the photo on my channel community page. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I hope you've enjoyed this little trip to Venice today. I'll see you next time. Bye.